welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
This is Jessica with Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast, and I am really excited to be chatting with this author today about her book, The Fourth Wing, which is, man, it's just the writing style is so fresh. It's got it's fantasy, it's romance, it's mystery, it's got all the things. And this is from a new imprint of Macmillan, Red Tower Books, I believe.
Yep, it's from Entangled. So Entangled is distributed by Macmillan, and it's their new imprint, Red Tower.
Okay, let's backtrack. Tell everyone who you are and tell us about Fourth Wing.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Yarros. I'm a USA Today bestselling author. I have about, 15 to 20 books out. I always forget what's written and what's published and what's not. And Fourth Wing is my debut fantasy. I usually write contemporary romance and women's fiction. Fourth Wing is about an elite school. It's a war college for dragon riders, and it follows our main character Violet, who has a chronic illness, and she's thrown into the writers quadrant when she was always meant to be a scribe, and kind of follows this very brutal world where if you're weak, dragons incinerate you because they control who they bow into.
So I loved it, and there's so much that to love about this book. I think it's considered new adult, which is interesting because I feel like a lot of people, it came from this situation where people are like, I like a lot of the stuff that's happening in YA, and it's not that I'm ashamed to read YA, but I kind of wish that there were characters my age or a little older who were dealing with this stuff, because there's something that it's almost like people kind of felt like, okay, you either are writing about people who are teens or people who are in, I don't know, their 50s. No
Right.
offense to people in their 50s.
No, none.
Not at all. But I think there is a market for people who they're out of high school, they're in college, they're in the workforce, and they want to read fantasy books about people their age that they can really relate to, coming of age stories. And Fourth Wing, man, it fulfills so much. So tell us about Vi, tell us about the world she inhabits and her family.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So first off, I've been writing new adults since 2014. My first 8 books are new adult, and I love that age group. I think there's a difference between being a young adult and being what I call a quasi-adult. Like when you're out on your own, you're making your own choices, your own decisions, and there's a lot more forgiveness for those characters in that age group because you're not a full-fledged adult. And you're not going to make the same, decisions as when your temporal lobe is, developed at 25. So Violet, I love Violet. She is intended to be a scribe her entire life, just like her father. Her body is frailer and weaker. She basically has what I would consider like the fantasy version of Ehlers-Danlos, which is what I have. So it was really super important to me to see, as a fantasy reader, because fantasy is my first love, my first genre, to see a fantasy heroine who was frail and who could survive on her wits while becoming stronger in other areas. So she's thrown into the writer's quadrant at Basgiath War College, and she's in there as the daughter of the commanding general, and the commanding general has executed leaders of a separatist movement from 5 years ago, and their kids are in there. So she walks in with a giant target on her back.
Yeah, I think one of the things I really adored was just how much world building was done so quickly in the story. Like you get into those first few pages, and it's like you really get a feel for Vi. You get a feel for her relationship with her sister. You get a feel for her relationship with her mother and who she is, even for her father and her brother, who are deceased by the beginning of the book. And as soon as she's there with the different recruits, you get a real feeling for what has come before. And that's really hard to do, especially, and I love that you say that fantasy is your first love, because I love fantasy too. But sometimes I do feel like the world building and the buildup can make, since 2020, I have been impatient. I wonder why,
Right?
I mean, maybe being like in a house for 6 months with just my family has, sort of like made me a little more impatient for things to unfold.
Right.
Watching the world go by in slow motion. And, I like fantasy and I like world building, but sometimes it does take a really long time to build the world. And I love how just with the voices of these characters, with just little bits of information, we were really able to just immediately be behind that line with Violet, waiting, for her to do her test, and we're like, yep, this is it. We're here with her. We know what's going on. And that is extremely hard to do in a fantasy setting. So I have to commend you and also kind of ask you a little bit about your process with that.
Sure. I think coming from a contemporary romance standpoint and a women's fiction standpoint, to me, the first chapter should always have your inciting incident. And whether in a romance, if it's your meet cute or whatever it is that sets your character down the path, to me, I want to step into that character at the moment their life is changing. I don't want to wake up and stare in the mirror, and I don't want to, have some random thought in the head as I'm driving. I want to step into that character at the moment their life is about to change. And so for me, world building is really, if you're in deep POV and you're inside your character, then what do you see around you and what are you experiencing and what do you recognize? Because as she's walking down the hallway to her mom's office, which is where, where the story opens, you're not going to be thinking about 20 other kingdoms over here or what's over here or what these people look like or what this dragon looks like or anything like that. You are in that moment. So to me, it's really keeping it true to what your character is experiencing in that moment so that you don't overwhelm your reader. And I think, I like keeping it accessible. So you'll notice there's a lot of modern terminology because I think there's like, how do I put this? I think a lot of fantasy authors get up on what vernacular we're using. And I look at etymology like, okay, well, what timeline are you okay with cutting off your etymology at? Because to me, I think writing in a modern vernacular just makes fantasy more accessible to modern day readers. So I just kind of blend both the modern terminology and making sure that our characters only experiencing what they need to be and not overwhelming the reader.
Yeah, excellent. I think it really came across as, it really did come across. And I think that it's certainly going to add to the enjoyment of the book. I think I've noticed a lot more fantasy sort of becoming, again, accessible like that. And I'm not knocking again what's come before, but I do feel like it really does, it really does sort of allow the reader to really live in that world, which is like, it's like an appeal of fantasy. I mean, this is why people play Dungeons and Dragons. You want to live in that world. So, and that's also why like role-playing games like that, they evolve because things change. But I do want to ask a little bit about the college itself and sort of just how you kind of came together with it, because I really like it. It's been compared a bit to Naomi Novik's is it Scarlemant's books?
I think it's Scholomance, and I haven't read them. So as I get knocked for it, I haven't read those, so I can't speak directly to what's similar to them or not. Bezgayev came across because when I pitched this to my publisher, and I'm lucky, I've been with my publisher since 2014, so I have a really great relationship with them. It had been like a normal army unit, and my publisher, my editor, the same person, she said, why don't we lean into your experience as a military brat and a military wife and put it at a war college? And I'm like, yeah, done with it. Done. Absolutely done. So I developed Bezgayev War College. And my thought was just like any other war college, or, like we're here in Colorado Springs with the Air Force Academy and all that kind of stuff. I gave it 4 majors. So, and I know it's gotten compared to Divergent in some ways, which kind of cracks me up because I'm like, no. It's just, they're just going to college and choosing their majors. That's it. Like, there's no like, what is your personality and where's
your tattoos?
No, they just.
By the way, when I read that book, all I wanted to do was get a tattoo, and then I'm like, but no, there's more pain involved. So
I know.
Yeah, but anyway, I digress.
No, you're fine. I have 6 of them. I love tattoos. And they do have tattoos in the writer's quadrant just because they don't have any regulations on their uniform or anything. As long as they're wearing white or black, they can do whatever they want because they're an elite force. But it's really just a college where you're pushing out your military officers. So everyone who comes out of this college is a military officer, and you're either a healer or infantry or a writer or a scribe. So because they have a rudimentary technology in sharing information and sharing news. So the scribes are in charge of history and things like that. So it's a giant war college, and the writers are set apart up on a different Ridgeline, because they have dragons, and dragons take some room, you gotta give the dragon some space to roam. But I really love it. I see it very vividly in my head. So to watch like the maps come across and some of the fan art come out has been just surreal. It has been surreal.
I mean, I have to say, like, that's got to be like the biggest flattery, is seeing people do fan art of your story.
It's it just makes you step back for a second. And I mean, I've written for a long time, so I'm used to having readers, message me, or I have people with tattoos from lines I've written or things like that. But seeing it come to life in fantasy is completely different to me, just because I think we have that grounding in normal reality in contemporary, but in fantasy, it's like they're actually seeing the same kinds of things I'm seeing. And so I had this moment of like, yes, you described that accurately. And then I'm just really glad it's that people like it. It's been really well received, and I'm exceptionally grateful.
So let's talk about Romantasy and sort of there's the different characters that Vi interacts with.
Yeah.
So there's there's a few different meets in the beginning of the book. There's like her childhood friend, and then there's is it Zayden?
Zayden.
Zayden. And then there's like one character who I'm like, oh, I wonder if he's going to be more prominent, and he's not. But that's a whole other thing. Were you very clear on kind of where Vi was going to go with the Romantasy, or did the story sort of inform you where she was going to go?
No, I knew from the second I started it where it would go, because I knew I'm a plotter. And so I have to sit down and know where a story is going to end up. Otherwise, I feel like I can't drive it toward there accurately, and then my pacing wanders. So when I sit down with a story, I think of, who this character is. What is this situation that makes it unique? What's that high concept that makes it like, oh, that's an interesting situation? And so I knew where it was going to end up. But what I love about New Adult is that when she's coming into this college, she has a friend that she hasn't seen in a year. And it's really fun for me. And if you guys are reading it, it's Dane. It's not really that hard to see. What's fun to me is to see in that year, what has she dreamed about seeing in that person versus what has that year done to that person? So like, who do you think you know? And then it shows you what being in the writer's quadrant for a year really transforms you. And I love that age, because you're really in between that love you think you want and the love that's actually best for you. So, and I love romance. I'm a sucker. So for me, even reading like Heralds of Valdemar, like Grown Up with Mercedes Lackey and things like that, like I have to have a romance subplot, or you can't keep my attention. And that's no hate to people who read straight up fantasy. That's just a personal taste of mine. I have to have that thread to pull me through. So I always know where that strong romance thread is going.
And as far as the family dynamics, that was another thing I really loved about the story. And I want to ask you something else before we close up. Just talking about that in general. It was such a good, complicated, heartfelt family story. You have this mother who's strong and distant and like this legendary warrior, and you have these two daughters, and they're very different, but you really do feel the love, even though it starts off with this mother being like, yeah, you have a chronic illness and you were training to be a scribe, but you're totally gonna you're gonna go out there and you're gonna be a dragon rider. And even though the sister's like, really, she's gonna get incinerated, there was love there. So I just want to ask you, talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Violet's mother is, the commanding general, best guy at War College. And so to her offspring should be dragon riders. They come from dragon riders. They are dragon riders. Brennan was one, her brother. And while she did marry a scribe. And it's so funny because I'm in the middle of finishing book 2. And so I always have to like stop and say, is that in book 1 or in book 2? Like, where did I, draw that comparison? Violet's mom loved her father wholeheartedly. So it's not that she disrespects scribes, it's just that she believes, her children should be dragon riders. And there's reasoning for that as you get deeper into the series. Mira, who is Violet's older sister, she loves her little sister immensely, but Mira is very much a fierce rider, just like her mother. And she's received awards and she's decorated for her service. And so she sees her sister as frailer, because she is. Violet, her limbs, her bones break, her joints dislocate, all that kind of stuff that comes along with having EDS. And so to her, she's like, oh my God, mom, if you stick her in this quadrant, she's, they're going to break her apart limb from limb. She's going to get incinerated. So the love there in that family is very, very strong. But like you said, it is complicated. And to me, complicated families are the best, because if you don't have complicated characters, what do you have? Do you have a 50s sitcom? You have to have that push and that pull. And I personally love Violet's mother. I think she's one of the more complicated and interesting characters. So it's fun to see where she goes.
So before we close out, I did want to ask you a little bit about your nonprofit. If you'd like to talk about it, 1 October, please.
Sure.
I'm
actually here right now. This is my office at 1 October. So 1 October is a nonprofit in Colorado Springs where if you call us and you're a foster parent, or you are in any way like involved in the foster parenting system, you can get a bag of clothing for your foster child. We fostered for 4 years, and we noticed that as kids came into care, they didn't come with anything. They didn't come with enough clothing. They didn't come with enough with bags. They didn't come with enough school supplies, things like that, which is, when you're removed in an emergency situation, I think there's just a lot that goes through that biological parent's head, through everything. There's no blame place there. But when our daughter came, my husband was in Afghanistan, and she came with like one bag of like a couple pairs of pants and some formula. And I remember having to run out and buy clothing for her with all of my kids in tow, and how hard that was on my own, because my husband was gone. And so our nonprofit is to make it easier on the kids coming into care, to make sure that they have at least a week's worth of clothing, or a new backpack, or an unmarked bag that doesn't say, hey, I'm in foster care, or new school supplies and things like that.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, so when do we have a title for the next book then, or are we not allowed to say?
We're not allowed to say, but I can tell you it's coming out in November. And I'm like the Tom Holland of like blurting things out. So I'm sure my publisher's like, why is she doing another one? But it's coming out in November.
Nice.
I can tell you that much.
Wow. So wait a second. So how many are planned in the series?
Right now there are 5. And it's fully plotted. So like, it's not one of the cases of, I know that sometimes series will drag on and on. It's fully plotted for 5 books right now. Whether or not it goes longer, but that's where the plot is. I tend to look at a story as a whole, like, where's our development here? Where's our development here? Where's our development here? And when I was writing the second one, we were only going to do 3, but I noticed the timeline was a little pushed or scrunched together, because you can't skip time like you do in Fourth Wing. You can't show like it's been 2 months, it's been 3 months. So I called my editor. I was like, what do you think about making it 5? Because I think this is where it goes. This is where yeah, it's absolutely done. I was like, okay. So for right now, it's 5.
Excellent. Check out The Fourth Wing. It is so good. And thank you so much, Rebecca Yarros, for chatting with us about it.
Anytime.
And we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.